That's great. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak at this event. So yes, here to talk about the National Digital Twin Programme in the UK. I am head of the programme and I'm based at the Department for Business and Trade, which is where the programme currently sits, but it is a cross-government programme. So it's not just related to the work that happens in Department for Business and Trade. The programme really was born out of the report, the National Infrastructure Commission Data for the Public Good, and has two key themes really running through it, horizontal threads, if you like, running through the programme. The first being, how do we enable information sharing upon which all of these sorts of different types of technology sit and rely, and be able to do that in a way that is really trusted, secure, and resilient. The second horizontal thread then really is, what do we then do with that information in order that users can engage with the information, visualize it, analyze it, and start optimizing the decisions based upon it. And those were really those key issues that were highlighted in that report from the National Infrastructure Commission. The programme is not there to create the national digital twin per se. So when the programme finishes, we won't have a national digital twin. That is going to take some time to create, but rather it is there to enable all of those building blocks upon which a national digital twin will rely. So the guidance, the frameworks, the standards, policies and tools that will be needed in order for people to be able to participate and connect not only the digital twins that they want to be able to connect, but also the models and the shadows, as we refer to them as well. So looking at increasing complexity in the visualization tools that people will want to be able to use to engage with that information. So we have a number of principles about how the programme is delivered, and we felt this is really important to sort of set this out when, in terms of, so people understand what it is that we're doing and importantly, how we are going to do it. And rather than go away and do a lot of development work and then expect something to rise like a phoenix from the ashes, we felt it was really important that actually things were done much more rapidly, but also that we were able to deliver tangible benefit as we went through the programme. And that to be measurable benefit as well. And that's really important, obviously, from a sort of oversight perspective, to see that we're getting, the government is getting value for money in investing in this programme. It's also really important that we use the programme to develop and promote open reusable assets, and again deliver these incrementally, so not waiting until we get to the end of the programme and then release them all at that point, but to ensure that people can come in and participate, use the assets, provide feedback, allow us to improve them, etc., as we go along. And the openness is really important. A lot of what we do, or by far the majority of what we do, is all about being able to release things openly. So even when we are developing technical product, it's about releasing stuff as open source. Also promoting this culture of honesty and transparency. Again, very important. I think we are honest about where we are and just how far we have to go if we are going to be able to get to this place where we are able to have interoperable digital twins, which is certainly the ambition. It's also important that we think about the full range of stakeholders. We're very good about thinking about those with high technical capability and resource, but we also need to think about those that don't have that level of access to resource or have the capability at this stage. So thinking about those full raft of stakeholders, and how do we ensure that this is accessible and inclusive? So anybody can come and participate, anybody can benefit from these technologies. So we're not excluding areas of the public sector or the private sector where they don't have that sort of resource, but also we are enabling SMEs to get involved. So this isn't just something that is going to be provided by big companies. There is an awful lot of value that SMEs can bring to this. And some of the best work that we've had done actually has been done by SMEs within the programme. I'll talk a little bit later about the sort of skills and culture as well, but it's just important that we don't just think about this obviously as a technology or series or groups of technologies, but rather that we think about the skills that are going to be needed for people to use these technologies and processes, and also the cultural change that is going to be required to make these things acceptable. So as I say, program really there, developing those underpinning rules of the road as to how we ultimately get to a national digital twin, and how we ensure that ultimately digital twins, as well as models and shadows, individually and when connected, comply with a certain, or are able to comply with a number of principles. And this work has been very much based on the excellent work that was done around developing the Gemini principles. So we've gone back, we've looked at those again, and sort of refreshed and looked at the definitions around all of those. So it's really important that we think about how we get to a position where we are able to specify, procure, and the supply chain is able to supply digital twins that have appropriate levels of safety and security, as well as are able to be deliver appropriate levels of trust. They also need to be used in a way that is ethical. They need to be sustainable, and that is not only from an environmental perspective, but also thinking about that economically and socially. Again, we think about a lot of these sorts of technologies and processes when we are in a CapEx phase, and don't think about how they are going to be sustained over the lifetime of an asset or a process or a system, which is obviously normally a much longer period, with generally far less resource available to those trying to maintain them. So we need to think about that as well. These technologies also need to be adaptable. Technology changes over time. How do we enable digital twins to be extended to ensure that they are resilient and robust, and also have that sort of longevity? And again, how do we ensure that they are going to ultimately be interoperable? And that's not only the information that sits underneath them and enables these things, but actually the models themselves. How do we ensure that we are able to bring those models together and do that in a way that doesn't build risk and uncertainty into that modeling? So I've talked about the horizontal threads that run through the program. The program then is delivered in 4 key pillars, and those horizontal threads cut across those through each of those 4 pillars. So the first one, operating framework. So if you like, the policy wrapper that needs to sit around all of this. And that is looking at a number of different aspects, some of which are recognized in the principles that I discussed, but things like looking at the legal frameworks. How do we enable the legal frameworks that will support that broader information sharing and the information of models, shadows, and twins? How do we get people to understand and measure the sustainability of these tools and processes? Again, looking at things like ethical frameworks, safety and security obviously being a very key one, and ultimately looking at what are the commercial wrappers that potentially need to sit around this, and what is the long-term governance that will be required in order to sustain a national digital twin. So if government decides that it no longer wants to fund a national digital twin or support it, well, actually, what does that governance model, how does it become a self-sustaining entity, if you like, or a thing? How do we maintain all of those underpinning standards, guidance, frameworks, policies, and tools, etc.? They won't be static. So how do we ensure that effectively a national digital twin can wash its own face in the future? The second pillar is the data and technology piece, and this is looking at everything from understanding user requirements, and we always start from that perspective of what is the problem that we are trying to solve, and then what are the right technologies and processes to solve that, rather than the sort of maybe more exciting way of doing it, which is, oh, well, I want a digital twin. Actually, now what's my use case in order to be able to get one? But rather starting and understanding every time we add complexity, every time we add cost to these things, then actually what is the value we are getting back, and ensuring that we don't end up spending more than the value that we get back. And that's obviously very important in terms of sustainability. So that whole piece around understanding use case, understanding the data that meets that use case, and again, not just going to the position of bringing in all of the data, understanding the data that is actually needed. And again, only adding data when there is a clear purpose and value in doing so. Understanding the quality of that data, and then bringing that through to make that data interoperable. So converting it into a consistent ontology and enabling that information then to be more widely shared. It's also looking at the tools that then sit on top of that information, as I said, so the visualization, the model, shadows, twins, the sort of synthetics around that, etc. So all of that whole process as to how do we gather data, understand its quality, get to a position where we can share it in a trusted, secure, resilient way, and then engage with it at the other end. And a key piece of work within this, and we've been doing a lot of work around this, is the integration architecture. And you'll hear this, lots of different sort of language around this, but I suppose this sort of data sharing infrastructure, if you like. I mean, it's how ESO referred to it, has referred to in the energy sector. And so we're basically all talking about the same sort of thing. And what this is about really is, well, how do we, with as low barrier to adoption as possible, ensure that people can come and get data from their existing systems and get that into a state where that information becomes interoperable and it is then shareable. So what the integration architecture does is it has adapters that allows you to pull information from those existing systems. It can bring it through the integration architecture and cleanse that data. That cleansing can also take place outside before it comes through that adapter. It resolves it, so looks at whether this information is already held, is this new information, is it about a completely new asset or etc., or is it in addition to information that is already held? It then maps that information onto a consistent ontology, and we're using a 4D ontology, which is the information exchange standard. That is something that has grown out of the security and defence community within the UK. It's also used in other countries as well, in certain sectors, particularly say in security and defence and national policing. But we've been extending it to be able to deal with buildings and infrastructure, so the built environment and infrastructure, and also looking at certain aspects within the natural environment as well. When that information has been mapped onto that ontology, it is then projected into a highly secure database. And then that information is surfaced through APIs, through a number of different APIs. The whole system is being built to be zero trust. So really being security, again, being this really key aspect. How do we build security in from the ground up? How do we ensure that this is as secure as possible? So zero trust is really around ensuring that at every point you have a unique identifier for the user, for the device that user is on, and for the service, so if you like, the software process. And what the system then does within zero trust is to effectively authenticate and authorize at every single stage. So it's about trying to stop a hostile getting in and effectively moving laterally through the system at every point, unless that authentication and authorization can occur, the connection is broken. So it's really about building that security in. It's also being built to have ABAC, so access-based access control, with a policy wrapper around it, so policy-based access control. So what ABAC allows you to do is really do very fine-grained security. So rather than just saying, if you're an admin role, you get access to something that an admin person get access to, it actually depends what particular type of position you are in and what the legitimate access you have to information. So it really allows you to go down to a very fine-grained level of security. And that's very important when it comes to being able to share information across organizational boundaries, because an admin role in one job, for example, in one organization, can be very different from an admin role in another organization. So think about an admin role within, say, the NHS, that may be an admin role to a consultant, versus an admin role in a utilities company. Well, they would have very different access to information about vulnerable individuals, for example. So it's important that we have a way that we are able to control that security and that access to information. The integration architecture is being built to be a distributed system, so it will allow organizations effectively to federate information across organizational boundaries. So the information, the owner of that information remains in complete control of what they share and with whom. So this is all about that need to be able to have the right information available to the right people at the right time. And also, in addition to that, that the end user understands the quality of the information they are receiving and therefore is able to make a decision about whether that information is fit for the purpose to which they want to be able to put it. This is very much the technical perspective of it, and it has all of that policy wrapper around it as well. And we're doing a lot of work actually with ESO, which Simon's going to talk about the work they're doing after this. But we're doing a lot of work about, they are trying to do a very similar thing. So how can we really work together to ensure that we are sharing best practice, pooling knowledge, and pushing forward together rather than duplicating effort. So that's been really a really positive experience that we've been having really over the last few months with ESO. It's been hugely helpful to the National Digital Twin Programme, and obviously hope that we've been helpful to ESO as well in that. So I would say that this is currently sort of TRL 7. What we haven't done yet is a huge amount of work on the federation. We can do core to core within an organisation. We're going to be doing a lot of work next year looking at how we do that across organisational boundaries. But we will be doing the first open source release of the integration architecture early in the new financial year. We've got some security work testing to do around it, and then we will be doing some open source release around it. And as I say, ultimately, this integration architecture will in its entirety be open source. And as I said earlier, that's a really important aspect for the programme. I said I'd talk a little bit about skills, culture, and engagement. Just again, really to emphasise, this is extremely important. We need people to have the skills to be able to adopt and be confident in these types of data, the technologies, the processes. And we need, as I said earlier, that cultural change that in order to ensure that people will adopt them, that they will trust them, that they will understand the best ways of using them and to use them appropriately. There is a lot of work being done around increasing people's digital maturity within existing workforces. So a lot of our work at the moment, yes, we dovetail with work that is going on, but we are doing a lot of work looking at next generation. So we've just run a 2 days inter-schools competition around resilience. So we do our demonstrator program on the Isle of Wight, and we got all of the secondary schools and colleges on the island, and they went through an exercise for 2 days and then presented to a panel of judges at the end their solutions. Really, really interesting exercise, and just increasing their awareness and getting them to understand the importance of data across a whole raft of different areas. Really interesting, lovely to see the amount of enthusiasm and engagement. We also had 2 special schools involved, and again, just the application, being able to see, or for them to be able to see how the subjects they study really apply in the real world, and actually seeing the enthusiasm and engagement and the commitment that and the number of hours they spent, not only on the day itself, but actually taking work home and doing it in the evening, was absolutely incredible, and I think gives us huge hope for taking these things forward in the future. I mentioned the Isle of Wight, so we have a demonstrator program, and again, this is a really important element of the program, is then making sure that we can take what we do and push it up against real life problems. So again, it's about demonstrating the value of the work we're doing and ensuring that when we say things are scalable, that they're adoptable, that they're accessible. Are they really? Can we demonstrate that? Can we prove that? Can we measure the value of using these types of data and technology? I'm going to skip very quickly through a couple of two of the use cases in the demonstrator program. As I said, it's taking place on the Isle of Wight purely because it's a bounded microcosm of the UK, so it's at a reasonable scale for us to be able to test things. But really important to say that we always then take these things, we're engaged with a number of others as well, to be able to take them and start testing them and using them in other places and at different scales. And not only within England, but also looking at engagement within, looking at over the border into Scotland and into Wales as well. Really important that we think about and make sure this applies across the whole of the UK, and that we involve everybody within the UK in this conversation. We're working with a number of others as well, who are either contributing to elements of the demonstrators or contributing to elements of the other 3 pillars. So DFT, for example, doing a lot of work around the ontology, around ethics, as well as the asset resilience piece on the Isle of Wight. We're doing a lot of work with defence around the integration architecture. We're doing some digital twin work with the Royal Air Force. We're doing a lot around data sharing with Home Office and Cabinet Office. I've mentioned the work we're doing with ESO. That's obviously relating to Ofgem as well, and doing work with the Global Centre for Rail Excellence, which is being done in Wales. So a lot of, I've just mentioned a few of the ones that are listed there, but really looking at making sure that we get as much bang for our buck out of this as possible, that we get a lot of people to test, get them involved in the program, and also take learning from work that others are doing. There's no point in us reinventing the wheel. Just really quickly canter through a couple of the demonstrators I said and the use cases. So talking about, and Mark mentioned earlier about the importance and key aspect of net zero. I absolutely agree. One of the key priorities within the UK, as it is globally, and the role of housing within that, one of the biggest contributors to carbon within the UK. So this is an issue that we have to address. It's also something that the public are concerned about. Looking at Google searches, you can see, from recently, public housing coming up as one of those key issues around net zero. So what we did was really then to, when we wanted to focus on this as a use case, was use this to develop those sorts of assets that I talked about earlier. So things around developing the use case, understanding how do we go through that process, what learnings can we provide. And when we develop playbooks, these are very much around the how, not the what. I think we're very good in government producing lots of documents on what you should do, what's best practice, but really poor at telling people, well, yes, that's great, but then how do I do that in reality? How do I do that when I'm maybe not a very experienced user in this space, when this stuff is new to me? So really focusing on that how. Also then data discovery, I talked about this process earlier. Understand your use case, understand the data that you need in order to meet that use case, understand those data sources, issues around data quality, looking at things like sustainability and ethics around that data. And what do I need in order to have that minimal viable product? How does the user want to be engaging with that information in order to meet their requirements? And also then how do we bring that data through, how do we go through the cleansing process, bring it into the integration architecture, and then do the ontology extensions that are required to make that information interoperable, and then bring that visualization tool in on top. So there's a lot of work that goes into the process before we really get to probably the bit that people most associate with digital twin, which is the visualization. This particular demonstrator, it's not a digital twin, it's very much in the digital model space, because actually that was what the users needed. So just as a quick canter through this, we went out, we brought the minimum data in. So we went and got those data sources. We've developed an open source data cleansing tool that allows you to bring that through, cleans it up. There are challenges around things such as UPRN, so unique property reference numbers, matching those up to energy performance certificates. And there's a fuzzy matcher in there as well that allows us to start resolving some of those issues and to get the data as good as we can. We've identified some further issues, so we're going back and doing a little bit more work on that. And that is part of how we develop this. It's very much an iterative process. Get something out, test it, break it, look at what's going wrong, come back, fix it, push it out again. And this pilot is actually now, as of, I think last week, I'm losing track of time slightly, is now in the hands of stakeholders on the Isle of Wight. So it's this really rapid turnaround in terms of going through that process and then getting a tool into the hands of users so they can start playing with it, testing it, providing us with feedback about what works, what doesn't, what is useful, the types of data sources, etc., that are required. And when you start looking at the data sources, they are vast. So this is just a very simple thing around the something called Eco4. It's a grant mechanism for improving housing energy efficiency, so retrofitting of housing. And you start looking at, well, actually, if those are the data, if that's the sort of answer I want to get, I want to understand who is eligible for this and who is not. There are a vast range of data sources you can start to go after to be able to bring together to do as much of that really hard data crunchy processing work up front as possible, and then present that to the users in the way that meets their requirements. That is really challenging. There are a lot of very interesting data sources within that, some very, very sensitive. So, as I said, we started off with with the data from DLAC and OS. That was the easy open data to go after, easy. There was a lot of work to do around it, but it was easy compared to some of the others. And now we're starting to chip away and saying, well, actually, how much can we do in terms of getting access to some of the more sensitive information as well? That allows us to test the security around the integration architecture and really sort of start to chip away at some of these problems. It's for us always about, proving the first, doing it first, testing it, breaking it, fixing it. When we're happy with it, go after the next first. It's a really important process for us. I'm very conscious I'm sort of fairly low on time, but I just wanted to highlight one of the other demonstrators as well. So this is around asset resilience and looking at the very manual processes a lot of organizations are still going through to be able to effectively respond to incidents. And I have to say, hats off to the organizations that do this, how they manage to process and gather the amount of information they do in such a manual way and to be successfully manage incidents is incredible. But clearly there is huge opportunity for this to be made better, to support them, to reduce the cognitive load on them by looking at how we can far more easily bring that information together, make it interoperable from multiple sources. You're talking about a lot of organizations working together in order to be able to manage situations. How can we ensure that they are better able to share information across them and have the same engagement with that information? They're able to visualize things in a very similar way and be able to interact with that much better and share decision making across those organizations. So you end up, this was an event we went to again on the Isle of Wight back in October. 67 people in a room gathering information, simulating, managing a response to an incident. Fascinating, but that it takes them hours and hours of time to assimilate information. So getting together the information on vulnerable individuals affected by the loss of an electricity substation, you're looking at hours of people's time. We should be far better at doing this. How can we go about supporting and ensuring that people can do this far faster and better? And interestingly, after this event, it was a flooding event that they were simulating in November. They had terrible rain on the Isle of Wight, coinciding again with high tide, and they had huge problems around flooding. So they had everything they'd exercised in October happened in the November. This is actually a rail line on the island, looking slightly more like a river. But that took them a month to get that rail line back up and running again. So, and this is not a problem that is going to go away. We have to get far better at understanding the resilience of assets and how we manage them going forward. And interestingly, just from some work that we did as I always fondly refer to it as our quick and dirty demonstrator, we did it really to show the power of the integration architecture. And if you show normal people lots of lines of code, it's not going to sell this. So we built a visualization tool on top of it. It was really basic. It's not going to, again, it's not digital twin, but it's really interesting the reaction we got from the stakeholders on the island. Just that ability to start understanding interconnectivities and interdependencies between assets, be able to understand vulnerabilities, to be able to understand parent-child relationships between assets. So if I lose this substation, what is the downstream impact of that? That the real power of it is actually bringing the information together underneath that enables you to do that analysis. But actually for the stakeholders on the island, this for them was a game changer. Now we are going on to do a lot more work on this, so it's not such a quick and dirty demonstrator. But I think it's always, don't underestimate the power of even some of the really basic visualization tools. We get very carried away and enthused by digital twins, and rightly so. It will be, I think, a real game changer in terms of how we do things going forward. But there are a lot of people that's too far away for them at the moment. We need to think about how we increase their digital maturity and get them engaged in this agenda. So never underestimate the sorts of some of the very basic stuff we can do and how powerful that is and how much benefit it can bring to individuals. And then lastly, just to say again about making it real. On the island just before Christmas, I'd had a phone call from the island saying they would be interested in looking at landslip issues on the island. And they had a suspicion that after the rainfall that things were starting to move on the south of the island again. And then there was a massive landslip before Christmas, a place called Ventnor. You can see actually how close some of those properties are to to the landslip. Unfortunately, nothing went down, no property, nobody was hurt within this, but just how close it is. So real issues that we are increasingly going to have to deal with, and how do we better respond? How do we gather data? So we're doing some work as well with the National Robotarium. So starting to look at different ways of gathering data and how we start bringing that in, and how they ultimately will feed into the sort of digital twin agenda. I've talked and talked for half an hour, which really, I've been rubbish and left no time for questions, but I hope it's been interesting, that it gives you a very quick overview of what work we're doing. I'm very happy. There's a link to a short link to the website, the gov.uk pages. There's an email address on there that you can contact the programme if you're interested in knowing more. If you're happy to eat into your break, I'm very happy to take questions. And apologies, Mark, for being so poor and not leaving time for those questions at this moment.
Yeah, on the contrary, Alex, that was amazing. You covered so much ground. I mean, yes, exactly. Take a breather. I mean, that was absolutely fantastic. I've not heard so much packed in. I've listened to you many times, but you've packed so much into that, and I think it is really clear that the National Digital Twin Programme is massively moving on, and you know, it's fantastic to see. We probably don't have time for very many questions. However, if we could just slip one in, which is kind of a little bit of a summary of a few of the questions that people were asking, and particularly internationally, is kind of where can they get at this, and is there a way of kind of learning from it? And we had that question both from North America and from Australia. So you know, this is a real question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we do very much, and I think there is, particularly obviously with countries, we've got close relationships with a number of countries, obviously, and Australia and America being two of those, and Canada and New Zealand as well. But also, you know, areas of Europe and Singapore, and lots of people that we're very keen to engage with and work with. So very happy. We've got different groups that we do some sharing across around things like the ontology. So we do a lot of work with Australia around the ontology. But very happy to, as I say, the website is available to anybody. We will be doing a lot of stuff through open source, and that will be available to anybody wherever they are. But if anybody's got any questions, or they're keen to do information sharing or learning, that's fantastic from our perspective as well. Because as I said, what I'm really keen not to do is reinvent the wheel. So if somebody else has solved the problem somewhere, fantastic. Let's talk about it. Let's look at what you can learn from us, what we can learn from you. That's the way we are going to accelerate this. And so, yes, very keen to engage with anybody that's interested in doing so.
Fantastic, fantastic. I suspect that you'll have some follow-up. And the other thing which is happening in the chat is loads of appreciation for what you said. You know, great and informative presentation. There's lots of appreciation coming your way. So
that's nice. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much indeed for that. That really was amazing.